The shelves of the Philadelphia Historical Society's basement archives stretched endlessly into the darkness, illuminated only by the narrow beam of Sarah Mitchell's flashlight. At 43, Sarah had dedicated nearly 2 decades of her life to preserving the city's forgotten stories. Her colleagues often joked that she preferred the company of dusty documents to actual people, a characterization she never bothered to deny. "Time to wrap it up, Sarah," called Martin, the night security guard, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "It's already past 9. "Just finishing the Oakwood collection," she replied, not looking up from the acid-free box she was cataloguing. "Won't be long?" Martin sighed audibly. "I'll be upstairs. Lock up when you're done." Sarah barely registered his departure. The Oakwood school collection had arrived earlier that week, forgotten records from a private institution that had closed in 1923. Most of it was mundane: attendance records, financial ledgers, correspondence. But as she reached the bottom of the box, her fingers brushed against something different, a leather-bound album, its spine cracked with age. Opening it carefully, she found herself looking at class photographs, starting from the school's founding in 1882. She flipped through slowly, noting the progression of fashion and photography techniques. When she reached an image labeled Oakwood School, class of 1888, something made her pause. The photograph showed about 30 children arranged in 3 rows, with 4 adults standing behind them. Standard Victorian-era composition, solemn faces, stiff postures. Sarah reached for her magnifying glass to examine the details more closely. That's when she noticed them. In the back row, partially obscured by shadows, stood 3 children who seemed different. While the other students stared straight ahead with period-appropriate stillness, these 3 appeared slightly blurred, as if they had moved during the exposure. Their eyes seemed to be looking not at the camera, but directly at Sarah. "Odd," she murmured, leaning closer. The 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, wore clothing that seemed subtly incorrect for the period. Not dramatically anachronistic, but wrong in ways only an archivist would notice. The stitching pattern on the boy's collar, the hemline of one girl's dress. Small details that felt out of place. Sarah made a note to research motion blur in early photography. Perhaps these children had simply fidgeted during the long exposure time. She slipped the album into her bag to examine more carefully at home, something she rarely did with archive materials, but justified to herself as professional curiosity. Outside, Philadelphia's October chill cut through her coat as she walked to her car. The streets of Old City were quiet, the colonial-era buildings looming like sentinels against the night sky. Sarah had always found comfort in the city's tangible history, but tonight, something felt different, as if the past were pressing more heavily upon the present. Sarah's apartment occupied the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian townhouse in Germantown. After microwaving leftover pasta, she settled at her dining table with the photo album. Under better lighting, she studied the 1888 photograph more carefully. The 3 children in the back row seemed even more out of place than she'd initially thought. Their faces were clearer than they should have been, given the photographic technology of the time. While the other students' features were somewhat blurred by the long exposure, these 3 showed an unnatural sharpness. Sarah opened her laptop and searched for information about the Oakwood School. She found little beyond what she already knew. Founded in 1882 by industrialist Thomas Oakwood, closed in 1923 due to financial difficulties. Nothing unusual. Next, she tried to find records of the specific class of 1888. An hour of searching yielded a newspaper clipping mentioning a typhoid outbreak that had claimed several students that year. The article listed names: Elizabeth Winters, 9, James Cooper, 11, Mary Holloway, 10. Sarah returned to the photograph, studying the faces of the 3 unusual children. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written the names of each student, row by row, left to right. When she reached the back row, she felt a chill run down her spine. The 3 children who had caught her attention were not listed. "That's impossible," she whispered. She counted the children in the photograph again. 30. She counted the names written on the back. 27. Sarah rubbed her eyes, fatigue clearly affecting her judgment. She decided to continue her research tomorrow with fresh eyes. As she closed the album, her phone pinged with a text from her sister Catherine. "Don't forget Mom's birthday lunch tomorrow. Noon at park." Sarah cursed under her breath. She had forgotten. Again. Promising herself she'd pick up a gift in the morning, she prepared for bed. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind lingered on those 3 unnamed children, their eyes seeming to follow her into her dreams. That night, Sarah dreamed of corridors she'd never seen before, lined with doors that opened onto empty classrooms. Childish laughter echoed in the distance, but whenever she turned a corner, she found only vacant hallways. The dream shifted, and she was standing in front of the Oakwood School building, a structure she'd never seen but somehow recognized. 3 children stood in the doorway, beckoning her inside. She woke with a start, her alarm blaring. 7:30 a.m. The dream clung to her consciousness as she showered and dressed. Something about those 3 children felt significant, like a historical connection she needed to uncover. After a quick breakfast, Sarah made a detour on her way to meet her family. The Philadelphia City Archives opened at 9, and she knew the weekend clerk David would let her in early. She found him at the front desk, arranging files. "Morning, Sarah. Bit early for a Saturday, isn't it?" "Need to check something before meeting my family," she replied, already heading toward the microfiche section. "Any chance you have Oakwood School records here?" David shrugged. "Might be in the education section. Need help?" "I'm good, thanks." An hour later, Sarah had found several relevant documents. The Oakwood School had indeed suffered a typhoid outbreak in early 1888. 3 students had died: Elizabeth Winters, James Cooper, and Mary Holloway, the same names from the newspaper clipping. According to school records, all 3 had died in February, 2 months before the class photograph was taken in April. Sarah stared at the dates, trying to make sense of the discrepancy. If these children had died in February, they couldn't have been in the April photograph. Yet there were 30 children in the image, with only 27 names recorded. Could the 3 unnamed children be the ones who had died? But that was impossible. Dead children couldn't pose for photographs. Unless... Sarah dismissed the thought immediately. She dealt in historical facts, not supernatural speculation. There had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps the photograph was misdated. Maybe it was taken before February, and someone had incorrectly labeled it as April. Glancing at her watch, she realized she was late for her mother's birthday lunch. She quickly photographed the records with her phone and left, her mind still churning with questions. Throughout lunch at the bustling Rittenhouse Square restaurant, Sarah struggled to focus on her family's conversation. Her mother noticed her distraction. "Everything all right, dear? You seem miles away." "Just work stuff," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. A puzzling archive question. Her sister Catherine rolled her eyes. "Always buried in the past, Sarah. You should try living in the present occasionally." Sarah ignored the jab. After paying her share of the bill and promising to call more often, she headed straight back to her apartment, drawn irresistibly to the photograph. Under afternoon light, she examined it again, this time with a professional-grade magnifying glass. The 3 unnamed children seemed to be looking directly at the viewer, unlike their classmates, who gazed slightly above the camera, as was common in period photography. Their expressions carried a knowing quality that unsettled her. Sarah decided to seek expert help. She contacted Professor Alan Reeves, a photography historian at Temple University, whom she'd collaborated with in the past. Though it was Saturday, Alan agreed to meet her at his campus office that afternoon. "Fascinating," he murmured, studying the photograph through specialized equipment. "The photographic process used here is consistent with 1888 techniques, but there are anomalies. The 3 children in the back," Alan nodded. "Their image quality differs from the others. See how their outlines are sharper." almost as if they were added later, though I don't see evidence of conventional alteration. Could it be some sort of double exposure? Possible, but unlikely given the technology available then. He adjusted his glasses. Where did you say this came from? The Oakwood School collection. 3 students died of typhoid before this photo was taken, but aren't listed among the names on the back. The numbers don't add up. Alan's expression grew serious. Sarah, I've heard stories about post-mortem photography being practiced at some schools in that era. After a student's death, some institutions would create memorial photos, including the deceased child's image, usually a previous photograph integrated into a new class picture, as a way of remembering them. Precisely. Though typically those children would still be named. Sarah considered this explanation. It seemed plausible, though something still felt off about those 3 faces, their direct stares, their subtle wrongness. Thank you, Alan. That helps. As she left the university, the October sky darkened with approaching rain. Sarah decided to visit the location where the Oakwood School had stood. According to her research, the building had been demolished in the 1940s and replaced with an apartment complex on Lancaster Avenue. Standing before the modern building, Sarah felt a strange disappointment. She'd half expected to find some remnant of the original structure, some physical connection to the photograph that had consumed her thoughts. The rain began to fall as she turned to leave, and she hurried back to her car. That evening, alone in her apartment, Sarah spread her research across her dining table. The typhoid deaths, the strange photograph, the missing names. If Alan's theory about post-mortem photography was correct, why weren't the deceased children identified on the back of the photo? Her laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from David at the City Archives. Found something you might be interested in. Notes from the Oakwood School headmaster, 1888. Mentions the unfortunate incident with the children's photographs. Thought it might relate to your research. Files attached. Sarah opened the attachment, scanned pages from a personal journal. The handwriting was cramped, but legible. April 17th, 1888. Mr. Hargrove completed the class photographs today. An unfortunate incident occurred when developing the images. He claims to have seen additional figures appear in the darkroom. 3 children he does not recall photographing. I assured him it was merely a trick of light or double exposure. The final prints show nothing unusual. Though Hargrove remains disturbed, I have instructed him to deliver the photographs as agreed and speak no more of this matter. Sarah read the passage twice, her pulse quickening. The photographer had seen something unusual during development, something the headmaster had dismissed. Yet the final prints supposedly showed nothing unusual, which contradicted what Sarah could clearly see in the photograph before her. Unless... She turned the album page to look at subsequent class photographs. The 1889 class photo showed no sign of the 3 strange children, nor did 1890 or 1891. But when she reached 1892, her breath caught. There they were again. The same 3 children, unchanged, standing in the back row. 4 years later they should have aged, graduated, moved on, yet they appeared identical. Same clothes, same positions, same penetrating stares. Sarah flipped through the remaining photographs with trembling hands. The 3 children appeared every 4 years. 1896, 1900, 1904, 1908, 1912, 1916, 1920. Always the same, never aging, never named. The pattern was undeniable and impossible. Sarah's rational mind struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. These couldn't be the same children over a span of 32 years. Yet the evidence was right before her eyes. As she stared at the final photograph from 1920, something changed. For a brief moment, she could have sworn one of the girls, the one with the incorrectly hemmed dress, turned her head slightly to look directly at Sarah. Sarah jerked back from the album, her heart pounding. She was overtired, her imagination running wild. She needed sleep. Tomorrow, she would approach this mystery with fresh eyes and a clearer head. As she prepared for bed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched. The apartment seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual city sounds muffled as if heard through water. She checked the locks twice before finally crawling beneath her covers. In the darkness, Sarah's mind returned to the names of the 3 students who had died: Elizabeth Winters, James Cooper, Mary Holloway. 2 girls and a boy, just like the 3 unnamed children in the photographs. Sleep came fitfully, and with it dreams of hallways and empty classrooms, of children's voices calling her name from behind closed doors. This time, when the 3 children appeared, Sarah could see their faces clearly. They were smiling, but their eyes remained cold and empty as they beckoned her forward. "Come," they whispered in unison. "Come see." Sunday morning dawned grey and dismal, matching Sarah's mood after a night of broken sleep. She made strong coffee and returned to her dining table, where the Oakwood album lay open to the 1920 photograph. In daylight, the image appeared normal again, no moving figures, just the same 3 anachronistic children standing silently in the back row. Sarah decided to approach the mystery methodically, as she would any historical research. She created a timeline of the Oakwood School, noting the typhoid outbreak and the subsequent appearances of the 3 children in photographs. Next, she compiled what she knew about Elizabeth Winters, James Cooper, and Mary Holloway, the students who had died. Information was sparse. City death records confirmed they had died within days of each other in February 1888. A brief newspaper obituary mentioned that all 3 had been boarders at the school with no local family. Their bodies had been interred in the school's small cemetery, which had been relocated when the building was demolished in the 1940s. Sarah paused, considering this new information. Where had the remains been moved? She searched online and discovered that the graves from the Oakwood School Cemetery had been transferred to Laurel Hill Cemetery, one of Philadelphia's historic burial grounds. Despite the rain, Sarah decided to visit. She needed something tangible, something real to connect with these children whose images had so disturbed her. Perhaps seeing their graves would provide closure, allowing her to return the album to the archives and move on. Laurel Hill Cemetery sprawled across acres of landscaped grounds overlooking the Schuylkill River. The administration building was open, and Sarah inquired about the Oakwood School relocations. That would be in Section East, plots 220 through 238, the elderly attendant informed her after consulting ancient records. Not many visitors to those ones. They're mostly children, poor things. Sarah thanked him and ventured into the rain, following the winding paths to Section East. The graves were modest, simple stones bearing names, dates, and the inscription Oakwood School beneath each. She found them easily. Elizabeth Winters, 1878-1888, James Cooper, 1877-1888, and Mary Holloway, 1878-1888. All 3 stones were weathered but legible, arranged side by side as if the children remained classmates even in death. As Sarah stood before the graves, a peculiar sensation washed over her, not grief or fear, but a profound sense of being noticed. The cemetery was empty, yet she felt observed, acknowledged. She shivered, attributing the feeling to the cold rain and her own overwrought imagination. "Excuse me," called a voice behind her. "Are you family?" Sarah turned to find an elderly man beneath a black umbrella, regarding her curiously. "No," she replied, "I'm an archivist. I found these children in some old photographs and wanted to learn more about them." The man nodded. "Interesting. I'm a bit of a local historian myself. These poor children died in the typhoid outbreak of '88. Tragic business. Did you know the Oakwood School? Only by reputation. Closed before my time, though my grandfather attended in the early 1900s, used to tell stories." He trailed off, glancing at the graves. "What kind of stories?" Sarah asked, her interest piqued. The man hesitated. "Ghost stories, mainly. Children's imagination. He claimed the school was haunted by 3 students who died there. Said they appeared in class photographs, though no one could see them until the pictures were developed. he chuckled. The fantasies of schoolboys. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Did he mention anything else about these supposed ghosts? Only that they were looking for someone, a witness he called it, someone to see what happened to them. The man shrugged. Like I said, children's tales. They chatted a few minutes longer, but the man had little else to offer. As he walked away, Sarah turned back to the graves, her mind racing. The old man's story aligned too closely with what she'd discovered to be mere coincidence. Looking down at the simple headstones, Sarah whispered, "What are you trying to show me?" Only the rain answered, pattering against leaves and stone. Back in her apartment, Sarah hung her wet coat and made tea to warm herself. She couldn't stop thinking about the elderly man's words. They were looking for someone, a witness. If, and it was an enormous if, the 3 children in the photographs were somehow the spirits of Elizabeth, James, and Mary, what did they want witnessed? What had happened to them? The typhoid explanation had seemed straightforward, but now Sarah wondered if there was more to the story. She returned to her laptop, searching for any additional information about the 1888 outbreak at Oakwood. A medical journal from the period mentioned the incident briefly, noting that the infection had been traced to contaminated water from a well on the school grounds. The well had subsequently been sealed. What caught Sarah's attention, however, was a line near the end of the article. The rapid progression of symptoms in the 3 victims suggests an unusually virulent strain, or potentially exposure to a concentrated source of infection. Something about that phrasing nagged at her. Sarah wasn't a medical expert, but she knew enough about historical epidemics to recognize when something sounded atypical. If the 3 children had been specifically exposed to a concentrated source, could that indicate something other than accidental contamination? She needed more information. The Historical Society would be closed until Monday, but there was one resource she could access immediately, the photograph album itself. Sarah examined each appearance of the 3 children more carefully, looking for any details she might have missed. In the 1888 photograph, they stood together at the back. In 1892, they had moved slightly apart but remained in the back row. By 1896, they had separated further, with Mary on the left side, Elizabeth in the center, and James on the right. In 1900, Sarah noticed something she'd overlooked. James appeared to be pointing downward, his hand positioned at his side, but his index finger extended toward the floor. In 1904, Elizabeth's head was tilted slightly, her gaze directed toward the right side of the frame, rather than at the camera. Sarah began sketching the positions and gestures, trying to discern a pattern. Were they attempting to communicate something through these subtle changes? If so, she couldn't decipher the message. Frustrated, she decided to research the school's layout. Perhaps the children's positioning corresponded to something physical about the building. The Historical Society archives might contain architectural plans, but she would have to wait until tomorrow to check. As evening fell, Sarah ordered delivery food and continued working. She created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every appearance of the 3 children, noting their positions, expressions, and any anomalies. The exercise felt productive, keeping her analytical mind engaged and the creeping unease at bay. Around midnight, exhaustion finally overtook her. As she prepared for bed, Sarah placed the album on her nightstand, not quite ready to let it out of her sight. She fell asleep quickly. Her dreams once again filled with corridors and classrooms, with 3 children always just ahead, leading her deeper into an unfamiliar building. This time, they led her to a door she hadn't seen before. It opened onto a staircase descending into darkness. "Down," the children whispered. "Down below." Sarah woke Monday morning with the dream still vivid in her mind. The children had been trying to show her something beneath the school, something in the basement or foundation. She showered and dressed quickly, eager to get to the Historical Society and continue her research. The morning staff greeted her with surprise as she arrived the moment the doors opened. "Early start, Sarah?" asked Diane, the front desk clerk. "Research project," Sarah replied vaguely, already heading for the archives. She spent the morning hunting for architectural plans of the Oakwood School. Eventually, she found them in a collection of city planning documents, detailed blueprints from 1880, with subsequent modifications noted through 1920. The original building had been a three-story structure with a small basement used primarily for storage and housing the boiler. An addition in 1895 had expanded the basement significantly, converting part of it into a science laboratory. Most interestingly, the plans showed a well located in what would have been the northeast corner of the basement, the same well that had been sealed after the typhoid outbreak. Sarah studied the later modifications carefully. In 1897, the area around the sealed well had been walled off entirely, creating a small, inaccessible room in the basement corner. No reason was given for this alteration. The pieces were beginning to connect. The 3 children who died had been poisoned by water from the well. Their appearances in photographs began pointing toward the basement after the well area was sealed off. They wanted someone to look there, to witness something about their deaths. But what, and why wait for Sarah over a century later? She needed to see the location for herself. The Oakwood School was gone, but the foundation might still exist beneath the apartment building that had replaced it. It was a long shot, but Sarah had to try. Leaving the Historical Society, she drove back to Lancaster Avenue. The apartment building was unremarkable, a 4-story brick structure built in the 1940s. Sarah approached the front entrance, still unsure how she would gain access to the basement. Fortune favored her when she noticed a maintenance worker unloading supplies from a van. "Excuse me," she called. "I'm researching the history of this site for the Philadelphia Historical Society. Would it be possible to see the basement? I believe it may contain foundation elements from the original building." The worker looked skeptical. "You'd need to talk to management, but they're closed today. Come back tomorrow." Sarah nodded, disappointed but not deterred. As the worker carried boxes toward a side entrance, she followed casually. "Was this building constructed on the original foundation?" she asked. "I've seen cases where older foundations were incorporated into newer structures to save costs." The worker paused. "Yeah, actually. There's a section of the basement that's different. Older stonework. Management keeps it locked up because of structural concerns." "The northeast corner?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. The worker gave her a curious look. "How'd you know that?" "Historical records. Would you mind showing me? It would really help my research." He hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess it can't hurt. Follow me, but we'll have to be quick." Sarah followed him through the side entrance and down a utilitarian hallway to a service elevator. They descended to the basement, a sprawling space divided into storage areas, utility rooms, and a large laundry facility. The worker led her past these to a far corner where an older section of wall was visible, constructed of stones rather than modern materials. "That's from the original building," he explained. "And over here." He led her to a heavy door secured with both a padlock and a deadbolt. "This is the sealed area I mentioned. Can't open it, though. Management keeps the keys and it's strictly off-limits." Sarah examined the door. It was newer than the stone walls, but still decades old. A small plaque beside it read simply, "Danger, do not enter, structural hazard." "Has anyone been in there recently?" she asked. "Not that I know of. Been locked as long as I've worked here." He checked his watch. "I need to get back to work. You should probably head out the way we came in." Sarah thanked him and allowed herself to be escorted back to the entrance. As they parted ways, she asked one final question. "Have you ever heard any stories about this building being haunted, specifically by children?" The worker's expression changed subtly. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Historical sites often accumulate such tales." He seemed to debate internally before answering. "Some of the residents claim to have seen children in the hallways, kids that don't live here, and sometimes in the basement." He shook his head. "Anyway, It's just stories people tell. Old buildings make noises. Sarah nodded, thanked him again, and left. Outside, she sat in her car, contemplating her next move. The sealed room in the northeast corner had to be significant. It corresponded to the location of the well and to the area the children in the photographs seemed to be indicating. She needed to get inside that room. But how? Breaking in wasn't an option. Not only was it illegal, but she had no tools for removing heavy locks. She would have to find another approach. Returning to her apartment, Sarah resumed her research. She searched for news articles about the apartment building, wondering if any renovations or repairs had ever necessitated opening the sealed room. Nothing relevant appeared. Next, she looked into the building's ownership history, hoping to identify the current management company. After several searches, she discovered it was owned by Lancaster Holdings LLC, a subsidiary of Oakwood Investments. The name stopped her cold. Oakwood. Could there be a connection to the original school? Further digging revealed that Oakwood Investments had been founded in 1925 by Thomas Oakwood Jr., son of the school's founder. The company had remained in family hands for generations. The current CEO was Richard Oakwood, a direct descendant. Sarah stared at her screen, processing this information. The Oakwood family had maintained control of the property even after the school closed. They had sealed off the area around the well and later constructed a new building while preserving and securing that particular section of the foundation. They were hiding something. And the three children, Elizabeth, James, and Mary, had been trying for over a century to reveal it. Sarah reached for her phone and dialed the number listed for Lancaster Holdings LLC. After several transfers, she reached a receptionist. "I'm researching the history of the Oakwood School for the Philadelphia Historical Society," Sarah explained, the partial lie coming easily. "I understand your company manages the apartment building now standing on that site. Would it be possible to arrange access to the basement area that contains the original foundation?" "I'm afraid that won't be possible," the receptionist replied smoothly. "That section is structurally unsound and closed to all personnel. Perhaps I could speak with someone in the Oakwood family? Given their historical connection to the property, I'm sorry, but the Oakwoods don't involve themselves in day-to-day property management. I can take your contact information if you'd like to submit a formal request, but I should warn you that such requests are rarely approved." Sarah provided her details without much hope. As expected, she received an email within the hour, politely but firmly denying her request, citing safety concerns and liability issues. She would need another approach. Returning to the historical records, Sarah searched for information about Thomas Oakwood Sr., the school's founder, and his son. Articles from the period described the elder Oakwood as a stern industrialist who established the school to provide proper moral education for the children of Philadelphia's elite. His son, Thomas Jr., had attended the school himself before taking over its management in 1910. Interestingly, he had been a student there in 1888, the year of the typhoid deaths. He would have known Elizabeth, James, and Mary. Sarah found a digitized photograph of the 1888 graduating class. Thomas Oakwood Jr. was easily identifiable in the front row, a solemn boy of about 12, dressed more formally than his classmates. Sarah scrutinized his expression, trying to read something in his young face, but found only the typical Victorian stoicism. As she continued her research into the evening, Sarah discovered that Thomas Jr. had implemented significant changes after taking control of the school. The boarding program was eliminated. The science curriculum was overhauled, removing certain chemistry components. Most tellingly, he had ordered the basement laboratory permanently closed in 1911, transferring all science activities to a newly constructed wing. These changes, following his father's death, suggested that Thomas Jr. had been correcting something, addressing issues that concerned him. But what? Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts, an unfamiliar number. Ms. Mitchell, this is Edward Reynolds. I understand you've been inquiring about the old Oakwood School property. Yes, that's right, Sarah replied cautiously. Who am I speaking with exactly? I'm the General Counsel for Oakwood Investments. I wanted to personally follow up on your request. The company takes its historical obligations seriously, but we simply cannot allow access to that portion of the basement. It's a liability we're not prepared to assume. Sarah chose her next words carefully. I understand the concern, Mr. Reynolds, but I've found some interesting historical connections regarding 3 students who died there in 1888. Connections that seem to involve the sealed well in the northeast corner of the basement. A pause. Ms. Mitchell, I'm not sure what you're implying, but the typhoid outbreak was thoroughly investigated at the time. It was a tragic accident, nothing more. Then why seal off that section of the basement so completely? Why maintain such tight control over the property for generations? Another longer pause. I see you've done your homework. Let me be frank, Ms. Mitchell. The Oakwood family has preserved that site out of respect for the tragedy that occurred there. Opening it would serve no purpose other than morbid curiosity. I strongly advise you to direct your historical interests elsewhere. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Thank you for your time, Mr. Reynolds, Sarah replied evenly. I'll consider your advice. After hanging up, Sarah sat motionless, processing the conversation. Reynolds' call had confirmed her suspicions. There was something about those deaths that the Oakwood family wanted to keep hidden, something worth protecting for over a century. As night fell, Sarah returned to the photograph album. The 3 children stared back at her from across time, their expressions seeming more urgent now, more beseeching. In the darkness of her apartment, Sarah made a decision. She would find a way into that sealed room, with or without permission. The dead had waited long enough to be heard. Tuesday morning found Sarah back at the Historical Society, but her focus had shifted. Instead of researching the Oakwood School directly, she began investigating Thomas Oakwood Sr. and his business practices. If there was something suspicious about the deaths of those 3 children, perhaps the motive lay in the founder's personal history. Hours of research yielded interesting patterns. Oakwood had made his fortune in chemical manufacturing, specifically dyes and industrial compounds. His factories had been cited multiple times for safety violations and improper waste disposal. Most notably, a plant in Camden had been closed in 1885 after several workers died from exposure to contaminated water. Sarah paused, the connection suddenly obvious. Contaminated water, just like the well at the school. Digging deeper, she discovered that Oakwood had maintained a private laboratory at the school, ostensibly for educational purposes. According to expense records, unusual chemicals had been regularly delivered there. Compounds more suited to industrial applications than classroom demonstrations. The picture was becoming clearer. Oakwood had been conducting some kind of experiments in the school basement, likely testing industrial processes away from regulatory oversight. Had the 3 boarding students discovered this? Had they been silenced? Sarah needed more evidence before she could be certain. She returned to the death records for Elizabeth, James, and Mary, this time requesting the detailed medical reports. The cause of death for all 3 was listed as typhoid fever, but the examining physician had noted unusual presentation of symptoms and accelerated progression. He had recommended further investigation, but no follow-up appeared in the records. Next, Sarah searched for information about the well itself. Construction documents showed it had been dug when the school was built, providing water specifically for the basement laboratory. A separate well supplied the rest of the building. This separation made little practical sense, unless Oakwood had wanted to ensure that only certain water was used for his experiments, or that contamination would be contained to specific victims. By late afternoon, Sarah had assembled enough circumstantial evidence to form a hypothesis. Thomas Oakwood Sr. had been conducting illegal chemical experiments in the school basement. Somehow, Elizabeth, James, and Mary had discovered this activity. Whether accidentally or deliberately, they had been poisoned using the laboratory's water supply. The typhoid explanation had provided convenient cover. Thomas Jr., who was a student at the time, might have known what his father had done. Years later, when he took control, he had implemented changes to ensure no one else could access the evidence, sealing off the basement laboratory permanently. The story made sense, but Sarah still needed proof, and that proof likely remained in the sealed room beneath the apartment building. As she left the Historical Society, Sarah's phone rang again. Edward Reynolds. Ms. Mitchell, I've been informed that you're continuing to research the Oakwood School incident. I thought I made the company's position clear yesterday. You did, Sarah replied. But as a historian, I have an obligation to pursue the truth. The truth, Reynolds repeated flatly. And what truth do you think you're uncovering? That 3 children were murdered to protect Thomas Oakwood's illegal chemical operations, and his family has been covering it up ever since. Silence stretched across the line. When Reynolds spoke again, his voice had lost its professional polish. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Mitchell, one that could be considered defamatory. I strongly suggest you reconsider this line of inquiry. No, or what? Sarah challenged, her patience worn thin. Historical reputations aren't the only things that can be damaged. Good day, Ms. Mitchell. The call ended. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, heart racing. The threat had been explicit this time. She should be frightened, and part of her was, but mostly she felt angry. 3 children had died horrible deaths, their killers never held accountable. And now, over a century later, their descendants were still working to silence the truth. Sarah considered going to the police, but quickly dismissed the idea. She had no concrete evidence, only historical research and theories. And the Oakwood family clearly had influence. No, she would need to find proof herself. That evening, Sarah meticulously reviewed everything she had learned, looking for any avenue that might grant her access to the sealed room. Around midnight, a detail from her earlier research resurfaced. The maintenance worker had mentioned that management kept the keys. But who specifically had access? The building superintendent, the property manager? A quick search of the Lancaster Apartments website provided a name: Michael Donovan, building superintendent. With further digging, Sarah found his LinkedIn profile, which mentioned he had worked there for over 15 years. 15 years of maintaining a building while being told to never enter a particular room. Surely that would spark curiosity. Sarah formulated a plan. She would approach Donovan directly, away from the building, and appeal to that curiosity. It was risky. He might report her to management immediately, but she was running out of options. The next morning, Sarah positioned herself at a coffee shop across from the apartment building, watching the entrance. Around 9:30 a.m., a middle-aged man in work clothes emerged and headed down the street. Sarah consulted the LinkedIn photo to confirm his identity, then followed at a distance. Donovan stopped at a deli several blocks away. After he ordered and sat at a small table by the window, Sarah approached. "Mr. Donovan? I'm Sarah Mitchell from the Philadelphia Historical Society." She presented her work ID. "Could I speak with you for a moment about the Lancaster Apartments? Specifically, the original foundation in the basement?" Donovan regarded her with surprise and suspicion. "How do you know my name?" "Your position is listed on the building's website. I've been researching the history of the Oakwood School, which previously occupied that site. Look, I already told your colleague yesterday that area is off limits." "That wasn't my colleague," Sarah explained. "I'm working independently, and I believe there's something important in that sealed room, something related to the deaths of 3 children in 1888. Donovan's expression shifted. "You mean the ghost kids?" Sarah leaned forward. "You've heard about them?" Just stories from tenants over the years, sightings of 3 children in old-fashioned clothes. Maintenance staff refused to work alone in the basement. He shrugged. I never believed it myself, but, Sarah prompted. Donovan lowered his voice. About 10 years ago we had a pipe burst near that sealed area. Water was seeping under the door. I called management to request permission to open it, assess the damage. They sent a specialized team instead, guys in hazmat suits. Wouldn't let any of us near while they worked. Hazmat suits? For a water leak? Exactly. They claimed it was because of asbestos, but I've dealt with asbestos removal before. This was different. He hesitated. They spent 3 days in there, removed several containers of material, made me sign an NDA afterward. Sarah felt a chill. They were removing evidence. Of what? I believe Thomas Oakwood was conducting illegal chemical experiments in that basement. The 3 children who supposedly died of typhoid actually discovered his activities and were poisoned. The Oakwood family has been covering it up ever since. Donovan stared at her. That's insane. Is it? Why else would they seal off that room for over a century? Why send hazmat teams for a simple water leak? He seemed to consider this. Even if you're right, what does it matter now? Everyone involved is long dead. Those 3 children have been trying to tell their story for generations, Sarah replied, surprised by her own conviction. They deserve justice, even if it's only the justice of truth. Donovan was quiet for a long moment. I can't let you into that room. I'd lose my job. I understand, but can you at least tell me what you know about it? The layout, what you've heard from the hazmat team? He sighed. It's not much. The room is about 15 by 20 feet, stone walls, dirt floor in some areas. There's an old well in the corner, capped with concrete now. And there's a second door inside, leading to what was once another room, but it's been bricked up. Bricked up? That wasn't in the original plans. It was done later, apparently. One of the hazmat guys mentioned finding documentation behind a loose stone, papers sealed in some kind of metal container. That's what they were most interested in. Sarah's mind raced. Documentation. Perhaps Thomas Oakwood's records of his experiments, or evidence of what really happened to those children. Is there any way to access that bricked-up room without going through the sealed area? She asked. Donovan shook his head. Not that I know of. The whole northeast corner is isolated. Their conversation was interrupted by Donovan's phone ringing. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's the property manager. I need to take this. He stepped away, speaking in low tones. When he returned, his expression had hardened. That was strange. She's asking if I've been approached by anyone from the Historical Society. Said there's been a security concern. Sarah felt a spike of alarm. What did you tell her? That I hadn't seen anyone. He glanced at his watch. But I need to get back now, and you should probably stay away from the building. They're watching for you. Sarah thanked him and left quickly, her mind churning. Reynolds must have alerted the property management to be on guard. Her options for accessing the sealed room were dwindling. As she walked back to her car, Sarah's phone chimed with an email notification. It was from Alan Reeves, the photography historian she'd consulted. Sarah, I've been thinking about that Oakwood School photograph. There's a technique that might reveal more details, multispectral imaging. It can sometimes show elements not visible to the naked eye, especially in old photographs. I have the equipment at my lab, if you're interested. Sarah responded immediately, arranging to meet Alan that afternoon. While she still needed physical evidence from the sealed room, perhaps the photographs themselves contained clues she had missed. At Temple University, Alan led her to his laboratory, a darkened room filled with specialized equipment. He carefully placed the 1888 photograph under a complex camera system. This will capture the image across multiple wavelengths, he explained. Sometimes details that have faded or were never fully visible can be enhanced. The process took nearly an hour, with Alan adjusting settings and examining results on a computer monitor. Finally, he called Sarah over. Look at this, he said, pointing to an enhanced section of the image. There's something written on the wall behind these three children. It wasn't visible in the original, but under infrared, it's just barely detectable. Sarah peered at the screen. Faint marks could be seen on the wall behind Elizabeth, James, and Mary, what appeared to be letters scratched or painted onto the surface. Alan manipulated the image, increasing contrast and sharpening details. Slowly, the marks resolved into words, "Beneath the well." Sarah stared, her pulse quickening. "Can you check the other photographs, the ones from later years?" Alan repeated the process with the 1892 image, then 1896 and 1900. Each revealed more words, previously invisible. 1892, papers in wall. 1896, north corner. 1900. He knew. "They've been trying to tell us where to look," Sarah whispered. "All this time." The 1904 photograph revealed another message. "Junior helped." And the 1908 image, "Watched us die." Sarah's suspicions solidified into certainty. Thomas Oakwood Jr., the founder's son, had been involved in the deaths. He had witnessed what happened to those three children and had participated in the cover-up afterward. The final photographs revealed the most disturbing messages. 1912, "Not typhoid." 1916, "They poisoned us." 1920, "For what we saw." Sarah sat back, stunned by the revelation. The children had been documenting their own murder for over a century, hiding messages in plain sight, waiting for someone to truly see them. "This is extraordinary," Alan murmured. "These messages couldn't have been physically present when the photographs were taken. No one else noticed them in all this time. It's as if the children themselves added them afterward," Sarah finished, "imprinting their truth onto the physical images." Alan looked uncomfortable but nodded. "I'm a scientist, not given to supernatural explanations, but I can't account for this any other way." "I need copies of these enhanced images," Sarah said. "All of them." Armed with the enhanced photographs, Sarah returned to her apartment to reconsider her approach. The messages confirmed her theory about murder and cover-up, but she still needed tangible evidence from the sealed room, specifically whatever documents were hidden in the north corner wall. As she contemplated her next move, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Mitchell, this is Michael Donovan. We need to talk, but not over the phone. Can you meet me at Fairmount Park by the Strawberry Mansion Bridge in an hour?" "Yes," Sarah replied, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "Just meet me there." He hung up. Sarah arrived at the designated location early, parking in the nearly empty lot by the bridge. The October afternoon was chilly, the park largely deserted. She waited by the stone balustrade overlooking the Schuylkill River, watching for Donovan's arrival. After 20 minutes, a sedan pulled into the lot. Michael Donovan emerged, looking nervous, carrying a small duffel bag. "Thank you for coming," he said as he approached. "I think I'm in trouble." "What happened?" "After our meeting this morning, I went back to work like normal. But things felt off. The property manager kept finding reasons to check on me, ask what I was doing. Then I overheard her on the phone with someone, talking about securing the basement area and removing the remaining materials tonight. They're cleaning out the evidence," Sarah realized. "Reynolds must have decided it's too risky to leave anything behind." Donovan nodded. "I made a decision after that. Use my lunch break to do something probably really stupid." He unzipped the duffel bag and removed a metal box, approximately 12 inches square, corroded with age. "I went into that room." Sarah stared at the box. "You had the keys all along." "Building superintendent, remember? I have keys to everything. I just wasn't supposed to use this one." He handed her the box. "I found this exactly where you said it would be. Loose stone in the north corner wall. There's a hollow space behind it." The box was heavy, its lid sealed with what appeared to be wax, cracked with age. A small label, nearly illegible, bore the initials T.O. "Thomas Oakwood," Sarah murmured. "There's more," Donovan continued. "That well you mentioned. It's not completely sealed. There's a small inspection port in the concrete cap. I looked inside with a flashlight and saw bones, small bones, At the bottom. Sarah felt sick. They threw the bodies down the well. I think so. And covered it up with the typhoid story. Donovan looked around nervously. I need to go. I've already stayed too long. My wife's waiting in the car down the road. We're heading to her sister's in Pittsburgh tonight just to be safe. Thank you for this, Sarah said, clutching the box. I'll make sure the truth comes out. Be careful, Donovan warned. These people, the Oakwood family, they've been protecting this secret for generations. They won't stop now. After Donovan left, Sarah remained in the park, examining the box. The seal appeared to be intact, preserving whatever contents had been hidden for over a century. She needed to open it carefully, documenting everything properly. Rather than returning to her apartment, where she might be vulnerable, Sarah drove to the Historical Society. The building would be closing soon, but her colleague, Martin, was working the evening shift. Sarah. He greeted her with surprise. Twice in one day, the world must be ending. I need a favor, Martin. A big one. She showed him the box. I need to document the opening of this. It's evidence in a historical investigation I'm conducting. Martin raised an eyebrow. Looks old. Where did you get it? It's from the Oakwood school site. I believe it contains evidence of a crime. A very old crime. Something in her tone convinced him. Let's use the conservation lab. It has better lighting and cameras. In the lab, Sarah carefully broke the wax seal and opened the lid. Inside lay several items. A leather-bound journal, a small glass vial containing traces of a crystalline substance, and an envelope addressed simply Confession. With gloved hands, Sarah opened the journal first. It contained detailed notes in a cramped hand, documenting chemical experiments conducted between 1885 and 1888. The entries described testing various compounds for industrial applications, dyes, preservatives, and something referred to only as Compound X. The final entries were the most disturbing. February 10, 1888, discovered Holloway, Winters, and Cooper in the laboratory after hours. They claimed to be working on a science project, but I found my private notes disturbed. They have seen too much. Cannot risk exposure of the Compound X work. Thomas Jr. suggested a solution, reluctant but necessary. February 12, 1888, solution implemented. Introduced Compound X to laboratory well water, calculated dosage to mimic typhoid progression. Jr. will monitor and report. February 15, 1888, first symptoms appearing in targets. Dr. Werner suspects typhoid, as planned. No connection to laboratory made. February 18, 1888, Cooper expired this morning. Winters by afternoon. Holloway holding on, but incoherent. February 19, 1888, final target expired. Jr. assisted with disposal in well shaft. All evidence of Compound X secured. Werner's report confirms typhoid diagnosis. Matter concluded. Sarah read the cold clinical account with mounting horror. Thomas Oakwood had deliberately poisoned 3 children for discovering his illegal experiments, and his son had helped dispose of their bodies. Next, she opened the envelope labeled Confession. Inside was a letter written in a different hand, dated 1923. To whom it may concern, I, Thomas Oakwood, Jr., being of sound mind, do hereby confess to my role in the murders of James Cooper, Elizabeth Winters, and Mary Holloway in February 1888. Though I was but 13 years old, I assisted my father in disposing of their remains and maintaining the fiction of a typhoid outbreak. For 35 years I have lived with this sin. I've seen their faces in every class photograph, though others claim they are not there. I have heard their voices in empty hallways. They will not let me forget, nor should they. As I prepare to close the school, I leave this record sealed behind stone in the hope that someday someone will give these children the justice they deserve. I'm too much a coward to confess publicly and face the consequences in life. The chemical my father created, what he called Compound X, was a poison intended for industrial sabotage against his competitors. The children discovered his notes and formulas during an unauthorized visit to the laboratory. For this, they were murdered. Their remains lie at the bottom of the well. I could not bear to move them when we sealed it. Let them be found and properly laid to rest. May God forgive what I cannot forgive in myself. Thomas Oakwood, Jr. The final item in the box was the vial, labeled simply X. Traces of a white crystalline substance remained inside, presumably a sample of the poison used to kill the children. Sarah carefully documented everything, photographing each item and transcribing the texts. When she finished, she sat back, overwhelmed by what she had discovered. "You need to take this to the police," Martin said quietly. He had been silently observing her work, his expression growing increasingly disturbed. "These murders happened in 1888, Sarah replied. "Everyone involved is long dead. What can the police do now? Those children's remains are still in that well. That's a crime scene, even after all this time. And the Oakwood family has been actively covering it up. That's obstruction of justice happening right now." Sarah nodded slowly. "You're right, but first I need to make copies of everything. I don't trust that these documents won't disappear once they enter official channels. They work together to create digital scans and photographs of all the evidence." Sarah also prepared a detailed report, combining her historical research with the newly discovered materials. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. "I'll lock these in the secure vault for tonight," Martin offered. "Tomorrow we can take them to the police together." Sarah agreed, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The emotion and intensity of the day had drained her completely. She thanked Martin and headed home, her mind still processing all she had learned. As she drove through the quiet city streets, Sarah's thoughts returned to the three children, Elizabeth, James, and Mary. For over a century, they had been trying to tell their story, waiting for someone to see them, to hear them. Tomorrow, their wait would finally end. Sarah pulled into her parking space, relieved to be home. As she gathered her belongings from the passenger seat, a movement in her rearview mirror caught her attention, a car slowing down behind her, its headlights extinguished. Before she could react, her driver's side door was yanked open. A hand clamped over her mouth as another figure approached from the passenger side. "Ms. Mitchell," said a familiar voice. "Edward Reynolds. I believe you have something that belongs to the Oakwood family." Sarah's world went dark as something pressed against her face. Her last conscious thought was of three children watching from the shadows, their century-long vigil not yet complete. When Sarah awoke, she found herself in a dimly lit room with stone walls. Her head throbbed, and her vision swam as she tried to focus. Gradually, she recognized her surroundings, the sealed basement room beneath the Lancaster apartments. The concrete-capped well stood in the corner, exactly as Donovan had described. Reynolds sat across from her on a folding chair, the metal box open beside him. He had been reading the contents, his expression grave. "You know," he said without looking up, "I've worked for the Oakwood family for 25 years. In all that time, I never knew exactly what we were protecting. Just that it was important to keep this room sealed and this property secure." He held up Thomas Jr.'s confession. "Now I understand why." Sarah tested her restraints, zip ties around her wrists, binding her to a pipe. "People know where I am," she lied. "The Historical Society has copies of everything." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Your colleague Martin has been very cooperative. Amazing what people will do when their families are threatened." Sarah's heart sank. Her only copies of the evidence were compromised. "What happens now?" she asked, her mouth dry. "You can't keep me here forever." "No," Reynolds agreed, "but I don't need to. Once we've removed all evidence, including the remains in the well, this room will be completely renovated. The historical significance will be erased. And me." Reynolds didn't answer directly. "The Oakwood family has protected their legacy for generations. They won't stop now." As he spoke, the door opened, and two men in work clothes entered, carrying equipment. "Begin with the well," Reynolds instructed them. "Extract and dispose of all contents as discussed. Then prepare the room for demolition." The men nodded and moved toward the concrete-capped well, setting up tools to break through the seal. Sarah watched helplessly as they began their work, the concrete dust filling the air as they hammered at the cap. She pulled against her restraints, feeling the plastic cut into her wrists. As the workers broke through the concrete, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing one of the portable work lights. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, causing the men to pause and look around uneasily. "Continue," Reynolds ordered, though Sarah noticed he'd grown pale. One of the workers shone a flashlight into the now exposed well shaft. "There's something down there all right," he confirmed. "Can't tell if it's human remains from here. We'll need to send someone down or use the retrieval equipment." As they prepared their gear, Sarah noticed something strange. A faint shimmer in the air near the well, like heat distortion on a summer road. The shimmer grew more pronounced, gradually taking form. A child's silhouette became visible, a girl in an old-fashioned dress with an incorrectly hemmed skirt. Elizabeth Winters. Sarah blinked, certain she was hallucinating. But when she opened her eyes, Elizabeth remained, more solid now. And she wasn't alone. James Cooper and Mary Holloway stood beside her, their forms growing increasingly distinct. The workers had their backs to the phenomenon, but Reynolds had turned to follow Sarah's gaze, his face drained of color. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. The three children stood silently by the well, their expressions solemn. Then, as one, they turned toward Reynolds and the workers. James pointed at Reynolds, his gesture unmistakably accusatory. One of the workers finally noticed, dropping his tool with a clatter. "Jesus Christ, what is that?" The room's temperature plummeted further. Sarah's breath came out in visible clouds. The portable lights flickered and died, leaving only the workers' flashlights cutting through the sudden darkness. Mary Holloway stepped forward, her form now fully visible. Her mouth opened, and though no sound emerged, her lips formed words Sarah could somehow understand. "You will not hide us again." The workers backed away, terror evident in their movements. One stumbled against a wall, his flashlight sweeping wildly across the room. The other turned to flee, dropping his light, which rolled across the floor and came to rest, pointing at the children, illuminating them in stark relief. Reynolds stood frozen, the confession letter still clutched in his hand. "This isn't possible," he managed to say. Elizabeth moved toward him, her hand extended. As she approached, the paper in his hand began to smoke, then burst into flame. Reynolds dropped it with a cry, the fire consuming the document instantly, yet burning nothing else. "Stop this!" Reynolds shouted, his composure shattered. "Whatever you are, stop this now!" The three children turned their attention to the well. In unison, they raised their hands. The ground beneath the room began to tremble, a low rumbling that grew in intensity until loose stones shook free from the walls. One of the workers broke for the door, fumbling with the handle in panic. The other followed close behind. Reynolds hesitated, looking from Sarah to the children, then at the burning papers. "The Oakwood legacy isn't worth this," he muttered, then fled after his men. Sarah remained bound, watching in awe as the three children approached her. Elizabeth reached out, touching the zip ties around Sarah's wrists. The plastic grew brittle and snapped, freeing her. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, rubbing her wrists. The children stepped back, returning to their position by the well. The rumbling subsided, but the air remained charged with an inexplicable energy. James pointed again, this time at the north corner wall, the location Donovan had described, where the metal box had been hidden. Sarah moved toward it, examining the stonework until she found a loose block. Behind it was a hollow space containing another, smaller box she hadn't seen before. This one was made of wood, its surface carved with the initials EWJCMH. Inside was a single item, a small notebook bound in faded blue cloth. Sarah opened it carefully to find childish handwriting. February 10th, 1888, James, Mary, and I were working on our science project when we found Mr. Oakwood's secret notes. He's making a poison. He's been testing it on animals in the cellar room. We need to tell someone. But Thomas Jr. says his father will be very angry if we do. We decided to take some notes as proof. The entry continued, documenting what the children had discovered and their plan to tell the school headmaster the following Monday. The final entry, dated February 12th, was heartbreaking in its brevity. The water tastes strange today. Thomas Jr. is watching us drink it. He's smiling in a way I don't like. Sarah looked up from the notebook to find the 3 children watching her intently. I understand now, she said softly. You weren't just victims. You were witnesses. You tried to stop him. The children nodded in unison. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth, Sarah promised. Your story will be told. The 3 figures seemed to grow less distinct, their forms becoming transparent. As they faded, Sarah felt a profound sense of release in the room, as if a tension held for over a century had finally broken. She gathered the notebook and made her way out of the basement, encountering no resistance. Reynolds and the workers had fled, leaving the building silent and empty. Outside, dawn was breaking over Philadelphia. Sarah drove directly to the police station, where she presented the children's notebook and explained everything she had discovered. Initially skeptical, the officers became more attentive when she mentioned the Oakwood family and the location of human remains. By that afternoon, the Lancaster apartment's basement had become a crime scene. Forensic teams carefully excavated the well, recovering the remains of 3 children. DNA testing would later confirm their identities as Elizabeth Winters, James Cooper, and Mary Holloway. The evidence Sarah had provided, both Thomas Jr., Uda's confession, which she had photographed on her phone, and the children's own notebook led to a full investigation into the Oakwood family's century-long cover-up. Reynolds was arrested attempting to flee the country, and several Oakwood Investments executives faced charges for obstruction of justice. 1 month later, Sarah stood in Laurel Hill Cemetery for a special ceremony. The remains of Elizabeth, James, and Mary were being reinterred, this time with proper recognition of their true story. A new memorial stone had been erected, bearing their names and the inscription, "They sought truth. They found justice at last." As the small crowd dispersed after the service, Sarah remained by the graves. The October chill had given way to November frost, the cemetery quiet under a thin blanket of early snow. "I kept my promise," she said softly to the empty air. "Your story has been told." For a moment, just at the edge of perception, Sarah thought she saw 3 small figures standing among the distant trees. They seemed to nod in acknowledgement before fading into the gentle snowfall. Sarah smiled and turned to leave, certain that the Oakwood school class photographs would show only the students who had been physically present on those long-ago days. The 3 children who had waited so patiently for justice had finally found their peace. As she walked through the silent cemetery, Sarah realized that some histories were not meant to remain buried, that the past had its own way of reaching into the present when truth demanded to be heard. As an archivist, she had always believed in the power of historical records to reveal hidden stories. Now she understood that sometimes the most important witnesses were those that history itself had tried to erase. The archivist's legacy would be to remember them.